This is part 2 of my series, the exploration of how it is that an inadequate concept of morality and rights leads us to the pathologies of individual freedoms. It is inspired or led by the thoughts and theories of a.k.a. in his book Leiden an Unbestimmtheit. And yeah, if you are interested in rights, that's the first video, but let us begin with what will be happening with this video, which is a discussion on moralische Standpunkt, the moral standpoint, and then to go from context-blindness, which Hegel would call the categorical imperatives, which Axel Honneth says that Hegel decided to ignore something about Kant just so that he can make a point. But I am stepping ahead of myself, so let me just finish the breakdown, which is we will be ending this video on this very amazing passage on servitude. I mean, it's Hegel. Hi, my name is Wani, and I'm a philosophy student at La Sorbonne. And let us begin with page 62 on moralische Standpunkt. The idea here is that if we were going by the moral standpoint, we will be living in a framework, Rahmen der rechtlichen Ordnung nicht verboten. All your acts is only in relation to what it is that isn't forbidden. So someone in like the group chat for uni asked a question about this idea of how it is that morality is somehow something that, you know, puts us into relation with other people, but why is it negative? So my explanation was this. So from the book Principe de la philosophie du droit, but in German it's Grundlinien der Philosophie des Rechts. For us it is the principles of philosophy of rights. Paragraph 112. This is my summation. It is the execution of my fin, like my end, my action, or the effectuation, exteriorization, the realization of my will, ma volonté, is a positive relationship to the volonté, the will of the other. However, this positive relation, which is effective and real, is actually negative because it is a juridic relationship. And then if you go down to paragraph 113 in the remarks, so remarks is like this kind of like small little thing that goes to the side. It's not like really big, it's just like this indent in the pagination. So la prescription juridique, the juridic prescription, by its fundamental determination is nothing other than interdiction, prohibition. So like the reason why my action is actually a positive relationship is because it exists. I create an act in reality. I manifested an act in reality. But because it is a juridic relationship, a judicial relationship with someone else, and judicial in general is what it is that I cannot do to infringe on your rights or your being or your independence, this is the reason why it's negative. Because like then I can only do what is not verboten, like what I cannot do. I summed it up with my moral actions in this relation to the other is determined by what I cannot do in their regards. This rapport, this relation action of non-relation, inaction, does not give itself to a form, a base, or an intersubjective structure. Because this person asked, like, how is it like structurant? How does it actually connect a person to another person? People say like Hegel is really difficult, but it's just you have to follow the complexity. And I think like this goes back to the first video, which is about the therapeutic nature of philosophy, where you just have to like go to the end, be radical and go to the end and identify where the problem or the knot is, and then just like résoudre or like undo the knot, and then like there's clarity. So it is in this way that Begriff der Individualfreiheit, the concept of individual freedom, vollkommen unerheblich ist. It becomes entirely irrelevant, was jeweils als Ziel einer freien Handlung angesehen wird. So how it is that the goal or the intention of the action is now completely separated or taken away from this idea of individual freedom. Because like if I can only like do something based on what I cannot do, what does that mean for what it is that my true intentions are? Because I can't act according to my intention. I'm only acting according to what it is that I cannot do, which is not taking into account my will and what I want to do. So here's kind of the transition. It comes into this idea of a new attitude, Einstellung der reflexiven Prüfung festgehalten. So a reflexive examination in terms of the Zustimmung zu sozialen Praktiken, the compliance of social practices. So this reflection gives us connection to the context, which makes it social. So let me go to how it is that he criticized Kant, and then I think this would be clear. So page 65, here he says that Kant's application of the imperative categoric remains disoriented and empty because it doesn't draw on the normative Vorgaben, the normative parameters. So further down, he writes about the soziale Umwelthinsichten der moralischen Deliberation immer schon vorgibt, verliert der kategorische Imperativ seine begründende Funktion. So the social environment always predetermines the parameters of moral deliberation. The categorical imperative loses its justificatory function. So I have the three imperatives, and if you want to look at it in detail, I'll put it on my Substack. So from the foundations of the metaphysics of mœurs, of morals, I think in English, there are three formulations of the law. Agir toujours de telle sorte que tu puisses vouloir que la maxime de ton action devienne une loi universelle. Act in a way that, it is that whatever that governs your action can be a universal law. The second is agir de telle sorte que tu traites toujours l'humanité aussi bien en ta personne que dans celle des autres comme une fin et jamais seulement comme un moyen. So always treat a person based on humanity, not as a means to something, but as an end. And then there's like Simone de Beauvoir's critique of that, which I might include in the Substack because it's interesting and funny. And realistic. So the last is agir de telle sorte que ta volonté puisse se considérer elle-même comme légiférant universellement grâce à sa maxime. So act in a way that you can consider yourself or your will as this universal decider of such a maxim. So yeah, I mean, that's already a problem, right? How do I know that my subjective will at some point can be the one who decides what is a universal maxim? Sorry, I rolled my eyes. Okay, so yeah, this is the critique of how it is that these categorical things that seem to be outside of context. But the caveat that I remember of Honneth, he said that for Kant, these categorical stuff only comes towards the end when you really cannot decide. So it's kind of like you have all these problems and you're just like, but I don't know what is right, to the end, after all these contextual considerations. Then you go towards, or you rely on these categorical imperatives. However, Honneth says that to make a stronger point, Hegel was just like, you know what, let's just treat it like Kant just straight up just went from the very get-go, categoric imperative, which is apparently not the case. But I haven't read enough Kant to, know that, but that is what we're trusting with Honneth, who is from what I know, one of the leading thinkers of the reimaginings or the re-understanding or the re-actualization or reinterpretation of Hegel. So the last thing that I actually wanted to share was this, two things actually. The first is that if you actually take in the moralischen Standpunkt, as is, just like how there were consequences if you take Rechts, just simply as the finality of how it is that we should treat the definition of rights, it's the same as the consequences of taking this form or this inadequate definition of morality. What happens is that there is an Erlöschen, so a termination, aller praktischen Fortsätze und damit zur Handlungslosigkeit. So the idea is that when we are abstracted from the social context, our actions lose meaning because we no longer have any intention or motivations in our action. There's a lot more, if you're feeling like there's gaps, there's a whole book. I'm only reading you certain passages. But the idea is that what gives it consistency and what gives meaning is that it is based on our free will as content. And then also how it is that we come into relation because we have the framework of every single action, and that's how it is that we can measure the value of one action to another action. And because we can place an action within like a network of actions, we have an orientation. So it's not only like this determination in terms of like what does my action mean, like what is the point of like my acts, but it's also how it is that you're brought back into relation to other people based on the fact that your action is in regards and within this network of communication with other people. So to finish off, this one I really, really liked, which is romantischen Individualismus wird die innere Leere und Handlungsarmut. So this romanticized like individualism is then like this inner emptiness and inactivity. So this is due to the detachment that comes from the standpoint of morality. Okay, this is like a lot of German to just get a point across. The idea is that once we lose this orientation because of this detachment from other people, through the detachment from our intention and our will from our action, we have this like mood or emotional state that seeks or that results in this process called like unendliche Selbstbesinnung, so infinite self-reflection. Because you remember before like how it is that you change your attitude of how it is that you are considering your actions in compliance, morality, in compliance to social practices, because there is no determination, because there is no actual action that is led by your will, but only by what you cannot do, this negative action. We start chasing this thing that in the passage that he quoted to be a fixed point. So I'll just like go through really lightly this section that I really like. So we have this romanticized individualism where actually it leads us into this state of emptiness and inactivity, which leads us to search or leads us to spiral in this process of infinite self-reflection to try to find something to hold on to. And the sad thing about this is that there's such a longing, Sehnsucht, nach einer Objektivität, like to an objectivity, that leads to a certitude, which is the complete Abhängigkeit, dependence or subjection that debases oneself because one wants to escape the torment of negativity. Because we experience this pathology of individual freedom, of non-act, non-relation, and inner emptiness, we want to escape these painful pathologies. And he makes this comparison. It is like when the Protestants goes back to the Catholic Church, they have done so because they found their inner life impoverished, because you are empty. And they have reached out for a fixed point, einen Festen, einen Halt, eine Autorität griffen, to have like this grip on some kind of authority. Wenn es aber nur nicht die Festigkeit des Gedenkens war, die sie erhielten. But what they gained was not exactly the stability of thought. So, yeah, ending on a very positive note. I mean, I have many anecdotes, but I want to keep things like short and sweet. But the idea is that if you want your actions to have meaning and you want your rights to actually be the actualization of your personal freedom, it needs to be in context, in relation, and in respect to other people's freedoms. I wrote like a commentary for my finals on a very beautiful passage that my professor gave us. And if I get a good enough grade, I will share it. But there's definitely this idea that if I do not respect everyone's freedoms, we arrive at slavery for everyone. So yeah, I hope that made your day, and I'll talk to you later.